Hello and welcome. This is the Brooklyn Rail's 866th New Social Environment. I'm Carolyn, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the extreme pleasure, honor, privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Thaddeus Mosley and John Yau. And we are so thrilled to welcome poet Mark Key here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we're speaking from. And now to introduce today's guest and host. Thaddeus Mosley is a Pittsburgh-based artist whose monumental sculptures are crafted with the felled trees of Pittsburgh's urban canopy via the city's Forestry Division. Using only a mallet and chisel, Mosley reworks salvaged timber into biomorphic forms. These sculptural improvisations, as he calls them, take cues from the modernist traditions of jazz. He's been the recipient of many awards, and his work has been exhibited and acquired by major museums and foundations since 1959. Our host and moderator today, John Yau, has been publishing reviews and essays on art and literature since 1978. He is the publisher of Black Square Editions and co-founded the online magazine Hyperallergic Weekend. Recent books by Yau include Joe Brainerd, The Art of the Personal. He is the 2017 recipient of the Jackson Prize in Poetry and a 2021 recipient of a Rabkin Prize for Art Criticism. He teaches at the Mason Gross School of the Arts at Rutgers and lives in New York. And thank you all so much for joining us today. I'll turn it over to you, John.
Hi, Thaddeus.
Hi, John.
Well, this is actually the second time Thaddeus and I have met. We've exchanged anecdotes about each other. This is more interesting than mine. He was just talking about the fact that he was reading a biography of Thomas Jefferson. So you read a lot. What other books do you read? We know you read poetry books.
Well, I tried to read some things on cosmology, but I'm not very well grounded in astrophysics, so I wouldn't probably be doing sculpture. But I try to read things about what propels the not only the earth but people, and I'm very much interested in people, artists, musicians. In fact, I just read a book recently of Rex Stewart, and I read a book of an artist called I'm trying to think of his first name. Chasing Me to My Grave was a self-taught artist. Winford. But anyhow, all sorts of stuff, and that I think is interesting, and particularly things that sort of causes me to think. I don't want to read things that I think are pretty banal, or things that aren't challenging, or aren't it doesn't give you much perspective on how people who you think are interesting lived or thought.
Right. Yeah, you said earlier that it was hard to judge someone who lived in a different time, and that's why you read these biographies. So let's talk about the time you live in. You're 97 years old, is that correct?
Yeah, just last Sunday, Sunday before last, rather, I think.
Wow. And when did you start making sculpture?
Well, I started making sculpture in about the middle 1950s. Well, I don't know how much sculpture it was, but I started carving around that time.
So you were carving with a chisel. What were you using to make your first works?
Well, I at that time, hand tools were sold in college bookstores, and and whatnot like that, and hardware stores. So you could easily buy a set of carving tools, but now all that is sort of faded. No, I don't think there's a college that has a
Carving tool. So you started carving in the 50s. What prompted you to do this?
Well, what in the late 50s or middle 50s, probably before that, the Scandinavian design furniture made a big influx in America, and I was taken by the sculptural look of the furniture. I didn't realize it was sculptural, but there's something about it appealed to me. So a big department store here in Pittsburgh, they had a big display of it, and I decided I had to have some of this furniture. Along with the display, they had decorative pieces like birds and fish on rods. And I looked at those and I said, well, I can do that. So,
Wow.
but I did it instead of teak wood and copper rods, I bought 2x4s and steel rods, which was easy to come by and a lot cheaper. And so I made my own of those things.
So you made furniture and you made
No, I didn't
decorative
make furniture. I just made the decorative pieces.
Oh, okay. And then what happened? Because it changed from decorative to something else.
Yeah, well, I guess fortunately none of those pieces are around now. Yes. So I began to look at books by Malvina Hoffman and Chaim Gross and like that, and learning how to carve figures, learning how to approach a piece of wood or stone and so
Right.
forth. And I just kept reading, kept working.
Wow. So, and then you also went to the Carnegie Museum, right? Where I think you met Isamu Noguchi.
Well, back days when I went to University of Pittsburgh, and of course
Right.
the museums across the street, Carnegie Museums across the street, and there was no fee to get in. So anytime the class was boring or something like that, I had a friend who was a painter, we'd go over to the museum, and I began to look and study and see how people made different things. And particularly, I had a history class on culture, and I saw Brancusi's work, coupled with African tribal work, and intrigued me tremendously. So I began the process of learning and investigation.
Right. So you were looking at Brancusi and African art. Obviously, Brancusi was looking at art from other places, and you started just making yours out of wood that you picked up on the street. You found this wood. How'd you bring these large pieces home?
Well, I always had a station wagon,
Uh-huh.
so and I'm pretty strong in those days, so had no trouble picking up a couple 100 pounds and putting it in my station wagon, and so that was the easy part. The hard part, of course, is processing something into what you hope will become a piece of art.
So you were making these pieces by yourself. You had a few people that probably saw them, but not a lot. You're friends with poets and musicians like Ed Roberson, and obviously Ed likes your work or liked your work a lot. I think he told Nate Mackey and Nathaniel Mackey about your work because he put you on a show in New York, the Q Foundation. That was the first time I knew about your work, was when he put your work in the Q Foundation. That was your first show in New York City.
Well, it was my first single show. Before that, I was in a group show at what used to be called the Craft Museum across more years, in a few years before that, through contemporary craft here in Pittsburgh. And
So how old were you when the
Nick,
show was at the Q Foundation?
oh, how old do I now have to go? I'm bad on numbers, but that was early 2000. So I was about 20 years younger than I
You
am
were
now.
70 something.
Yeah.
You had your first solo show when you were in your 70s.
No, out of town. My first show I had at Carnegie was in 1968.
Right.
My first solo show. Of course, I'd been showing quite a bit in the late 50s in church basements and garages and places like that. And I was in the Three Rivers around 1960 or so. And that's when the director of Carnegie, Leon Arcus, sort of discovered me and really encouraged me. And
he encouraged you a lot, right?
yeah, he was one of the few people in those days, beside David Lewis, who wrote a book on, in the 90s. There was only a couple people that thought I was doing something unusual or worthwhile. And fortunately, that crowd has gotten a little larger, but
Right. So it's interesting to think about the fact that it was a curator at the Carnegie sees your work in a local show and encourages you. That should suggest something to curators in New York City. Maybe they'll get to leave their office a little more and wander around instead of going to only fancy galleries, right?
Well, Leon Arcus was a different sort of director. There, he was one of the few directors of the Carnegie that did that, or any other museum in Pittsburgh that did that. I don't think it's happened much since. And he also included some locals in the Carnegie International every 4 years, and that didn't happen before or much since after he passed away.
Right. And there's not, what kind of art world is there in Pittsburgh?
Well, there's, I guess,
multiple art worlds, I suppose.
Well, there's all types of artwork. Of course, there's the Warhol.
Right.
There's Carnegie, and there's contemporary craft. There's the installation museum, the Mattress Factory Museum, which is mainly installational and an experimental museum, and so they're still going. So for a small town, Pittsburgh has pretty vibrant art scene.
And did you start mixing and meeting artists that way too?
Well, but way back, there's a place called Pittsburgh Center for the Arts, and they 14 groups. They had Society of Sculptors, Associated Artists, the Print Group, the Weavers Guild. They had every type of discipline you could think of, and each group had a show at least every year. So, and I happen to belong to 3 groups at one time. I belonged to the Associated Artists, and I belonged to the Sculptors Guild, Society of Sculptors, and Group A, which was the abstract group. So these groups were kept you working all the time to do shows, and also you met other artists, and so that was basically my education,
right?
And showing in these. Sometimes there were theme shows. Sometimes, of course, the abstract group was always interesting because you did something that you wouldn't ordinarily do otherwise, like I made things out of ropes and plastics and found objects rather than carving logs.
So you worked in other materials which we don't really know about. We only know about the wood pieces, really.
Yeah,
Lots of different things.
Group A propelled you to do all sorts of things. I once made a row of plastic curtains that ruffled and made sounds when you walked through them and stuff like that. But we did a lot of fun things, and now the Associated Artists is probably one of the oldest art groups in the world.
Right.
In the United States, they're having their 107th annual show. And Group A just had their 78th show. So that shows how long these organizations have been sustained by local artists and interests.
Right. And now, when you start a piece, do you have an idea in mind, or do you just jump in?
If it's a small stool or something like that, I sort of make a few lines, and I usually have a log usually tells me something, but if I'm going to do a sectional piece, I lay all the logs out first and look at them and see how they might be joined, how they might fit, and what they might say. Most of my ideas are about weight and space, a concept, and so that is usually the theme. And I just call it animated. Most things are abstract, so
Right.
animated abstraction. So I have to have a pretty good idea, because all these things fit together. And my true art is that they come apart and usually can go back together,
Right.
so they can be transported and so forth.
Right. Your largest pieces, when they're made of multiple pieces, there's nothing that holds them together except each other. They're all fitted together.
Yes.
Wow. And then you build them in your house?
No,
In the backyard?
I have worked in my basement at times trying to save money, but no, I've been I've had numerous studios like a lot of people, but I've been in the place I am now since the 90s. But I got
You don't have any assistants or anyone helping you?
No, I have a small crane, which I bought in the 80s and when I was about 80 years old, but everything else, I was pretty much doing all the lifting and whatnot by myself. Once in a while, if there's something I need someone else, there's a woodworker on the third floor. He'll come down and hold something so I can see if it really fit the way I envision.
Wow. And you work every day
Yeah, you
still,
got to
right?
keep going. It's hard to get an old machine going if you let it sit for a while.
I take it you're the old machine.
Yeah, I work every day, but also, I'm fortunate to have that desire. When I get up in the morning, the first thing I want to do is get ready and go to the studio. And I miss when I'm not there, I'm out of town. I really miss going in the studio. Some days I might sit there and play records or read, but I always want to go in there, particularly if I'm working on something. And then when I get about 3/4 where I've completed the sculpture, I can't wait to see it standing up.
Right. And you don't make any drawings for them?
No, the only time I make models or drawings is if I have a commission, like for the convention center. I had to not only make drawings, but I had to make a model.
Right.
But other than that, I just lay the pieces out and chalk them up and start in.
And you also collect stuff. Look at all these things behind you.
Well, I have lots of stuff of my sons. I have a son that named Aneri, lives in California, who was like a child prodigy as an artist, and I have stuff from him and my daughter. They're grade school, and a lot of artists, friends of mine, and then a lot of African tribal art pieces and
And
some.
when did you start collecting the African tribal art?
Well, there used to be a woman had a very interesting store. She sold like Scandinavian furniture and home like dishes and plates and all like that. And she also sold some African tribal arts and stuff. It was a strange mix now that you think of it. And so I used to buy things from her.
Uh-huh.
It was in the 50s when we all had a little group of jazz people. We used to meet downtown at a place called Opus One. Was one of the few high fidelity stores, and everyone would sit and drink wine and listen to music and go and discuss what was late in design and music and so forth.
Ah. Uh-huh. So that's been the world that you've lived in for a long time.
Oh yeah, yeah. But most of all those people are disappearing. As Sonny Rollins says, there's only a few of us left.
That's right. And he's not a young man either.
Yeah, you can say that again. Yeah.
And do you go out to listen to jazz a lot?
Well, not as much as I used to. You know, you go back to the heydays when jazz clubs were, they're not even the same in New York, but
Right.
in the heyday here, they had like the Crawford Grill, they had the Midway, and they had the Copa and places like that. And bands would leave New York and travel through Pittsburgh to Chicago, and they were like real bands, not pickup bands, like the
Right.
Jazz Messengers, Max Roach, Clifford Brown, and Stan Getz's group, Chet Baker, Donald Byrd's group with Pepper Adams. All of them came through here, and so and they played a whole week, sometimes 2 weeks. And
Right.
so I would go almost every night since I started work at 11 o'clock in the post office. Then the bands start playing at 9. So I would go in 2 hours before work and listen to music. Sometimes I take an hour vacation and go in 12 o'clock instead of 11.
So you worked in the post office. That was
Yeah.
your day job or your night job, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then you made sculpture
Yeah.
and you listened to music.
Yeah. And
You
read
didn't sleep very much, obviously.
Well, I at one time when I switched back today, I was working from 6 to 2:30. So a lot of times I would stay up till 12 o'clock. So I only slept about 6 hours. But I slept about 15 minutes at lunchtime.
That was your freshener.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
kept you going those 15 minutes. You're very efficient with your time, I see. So how long did you work in the post
I
office?
worked there 40 years.
Oh man.
Yeah, yeah.
And were you in the office or were you
Oh
at the
no,
liquor
I
store?
just sorted mail, and the redeeming thing about that was I had a job that I didn't have to burn any intellectual energy at all, and
Right.
I could concentrate just on the things I wanted to create. I had a friend of mine that was a art teacher, and I used to always complain about you're not doing enough artwork. She says, well, if you're teaching art every day in public school, you don't want to see a paintbrush ever.
Well, you had it different. You wanted to see it all the time.
Yeah, that's true. When you got finished with the drudgery, you couldn't wait to do something that you hoped was going to be interesting anyhow.
Right.
And it's the hope that I think that is the really stimulating part of being an artist, is that you can't wait to see, at least personally speaking, I can't wait to see how this is going to turn out.
Right. You want to see what you can make,
Yeah.
what's going to get made, something you haven't seen before.
Well, I don't know if I haven't seen it before, but by me, it hasn't been done.
Okay. And you don't mind seeing, oh, here's some of your work.
Yeah, this is Karma in West Hollywood. This is a show that's up now.
Did you go out there for the opening?
Yes, I went out for the opening. I hadn't been to LA since in 70 years. So
Holy moly, it's probably changed a little.
yeah, well, at least I'd never been that part of this is in West Hollywood. I'd never been that part of LA anyhow. So it was all new, and it's an interesting space and an interesting show. I think I'm happy the way the Karma installed it, and so
I heard that you still install your work.
well, Karma has a group now who've caught on to my tricks, and they're able to put them up without me being there, which is really a compliment, because in the past, when I did things with small gallery, I would arrive maybe almost a week ahead to make sure that I put up everything myself, sometime with a little help. But
right. Because the Karma, I was told that you installed your show in New York.
Yeah, well, they have a space in LA now.
Right.
Too. So, but I'm very happy with how the show looked there.
And it's still only made with a chisel and a mallet, right?
Well, these are big gouges until I have an assortment of hand tools, and yeah, so that's all, steady working.
And where do you get the wood from now? You said from the forestry?
Well, no, I used to get a lot from the Forestry Division in the city, but I get most of my wood down in Western Pennsylvania, near what everyone knows as Falling Water.
Right.
There's a lot of sawmills, and I buy mostly walnut and cherry hardwoods, and most of the pieces you see are walnut.
That's not an easy wood to work with.
Well, both of them are hardwoods.
Right.
Very good definition. And
Right.
if you're doing really small details or even what I call drawing on wood, making facial features, you cut very clean.
Right.
And you get and also it works very well now that we're doing casting, because the lines are cut clean, and the different stroke mark, what I call gouge marks, that direct your eye in various ways. They're well reproduced.
Right. So when did the work start being cast in bronze? This is new. Right?
I guess about 2 or 3 years ago, because people were always talking about they wanted something for outside. Well,
Right.
wood does not weather well outside in most climates, and so we began to to cast, and also in the future, being that I'm rapidly aging as as time goes by, we'll have these bronzes, and that will survive me.
Wow, that's something to think about. I did not know that you thought about such things.
Oh yeah, I
Wow,
thought about
you.
that been for quite a few years now, and
I can see
particularly,
that.
yeah.
But the wood pieces seem pretty sturdy. They don't seem like they're going anywhere.
Well, wood is strange, and depending on the environment here is different from places that are dry and arid and have a lot of sunlight, whereas
Right.
Pittsburgh doesn't have a lot of that. It's moist and whatnot. So when wood expands and it shrinks, it does all sorts of things. So I have to have a little leverage. I have to have leave a little space where the pieces can come apart, but still remain stable. And sometimes
Right.
that's a trick, and sometimes I just got a call this morning from West Virginia University, where a piece of wood has expanded. Evidently, they're taking it apart and they can't get it back together. So they're going to bring it up to my studio, and I'm going to fix it. I've just imagined that it's expanded a little bit. It only needs a little adjustment.
Ah, okay. So the wood changes,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Because of
it's
the
an
weather.
organic material. Yeah.
Right. And what do you now this piece, this one's bronze, but it was originally wood.
Yes.
I saw that in the Karma show.
Yes.
And it's like two heads facing each other.
Yeah. Two different. It's a very geometric piece. You have a
Right.
triangular circle and a pure circle, and then you have a tall triangle that's a half circle on what would be a table.
Right.
And it was an idea I got, and of course it took me a long time to make the sculpture and to get it fitted and to get it so I could take it apart and put it back together. But it was very interesting for me to attempt, and also now it's two woods. It's cherry and walnut, most
Right.
and intermixed woods, and but both very hard woods, and of course the bronze is finally replicated. So yeah, I'm very happy the way that it's turned out.
So how long did it take you to make this piece in wood?
Well, I'm saying close to 4 months.
And were you working on other pieces or just this
No,
one
no.
piece?
I'm sort of a single-minded. Once I start something, particularly on a large piece, there's another piece that's in the show wood. It took me about 4 months, and no, you have to pretty much stick if you're going to get large pieces done. Yeah, you're going to have to stick to that one thing till it comes to completion. So no, and then too, you always have the problem of it fitting and seeing how it's coming along. So every day you can't wait to get in and start stroking again.
And how many pieces do you make a year? I'm guessing like 3 or 4.
Oh no, on the average, I do 6 large pieces a year,
Really?
maybe 4, 5, or 6 stools. Yeah, yeah.
Wow. So 50 years of working, making 4 to 6 pieces a year.
Yeah, something like that.
Is there a plan to do a big book of your work?
Well,
Documented?
Karma's done one catalog, and we're in the process now of updating some of the stuff that people have collected and so forth, and what they have in their possession. So
Right.
I hope within a year or so, there'll be a new book out, a large book with a lot more pictures of work, old work and stuff that maybe shouldn't have seen the light, but anyhow.
No, I think it'd be important to have a really big book of your work to document,
Well,
and also include some of the pieces that you talked about that you experimented with, like with the curtain rods and the shower curtain.
I, I think you'll see some of that, but you should have dark glasses, maybe.
Okay, I'll wear my sunglasses. I'll remember. I mean, it's interesting because that part of your career nobody really knows about.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of things that I do that I don't make, like everyone else, I guess.
Right.
I make collages, I do paintings, I also, people used to ask me, my so-called education is in journalism and English. And
Right.
people said, well, do you ever write? I said, well, I wrote sports for the course, I had a column, but I wrote some stuff. I passed off as for poetry, and fortunately, none of it is available now. But but it's all. But it's fun to do anything that it comes to mind, and I'm not afraid that things aren't going to be perfect or look good or bad. I think the fun for me is the attempt, and I think a lot of people are afraid to try because they think they're going to fail or other people won't like it, and but that's not what art is really about.
Sure. So you paint and make collages in addition to sculpture.
Oh yeah.
And have you ever shown your collages or your paintings?
No, I keep them pretty much out of sight, but they're around.
Oh, we'll have to come and visit you and look at your
Oh
closet,
yeah.
obviously.
I think they may have taken some pictures of them recently. I don't know what they're gonna show in here, but it doesn't matter. I mean, like it's you know, it's when you think about how intimidated people are about what they might like to do or because I think most children enjoy drawing and painting and whatnot, and most of them do till someone tells them they're no good at it.
Right.
And which is unfortunate. But I think that modes of self-expression, I think, to me, are so important to someone's lifestyle, particularly to an artist, but I think anyone, whether baking a pie or making curtains or drapes or something, I think there's no other satisfaction I can think of personally than something that you've made and completed yourself. And so
Right.
so I don't worry about too much. Even the sculpture, I have different ideas. There's a lot of things I like that no one else likes. but that, but but I had the joy or the pleasure of attempting to make something that I thought might have some creative character.
Right. So the pleasure for you is in the making.
Oh yes, I think I'm very happy that I still have the enthusiasm of getting up and wanting to go,
Right. 97 and you're still enthusiastic like a 13-year-old.
Oh, yeah. Well, I remember I did a piece for Gordon Parks years and years ago, and he came here to Craftsman's Guild and he did a talk, and I think he was 95, and he said, I'm just getting started. He was talking about doing a ballet, and he says, I'm just getting started. There's stuff I want to do. So I
Wow.
got interest in life. I'm fortunate that I still feel that way, but I always think about him saying that they still had the enthusiasm and wanting to be creative,
Right, at 95. Wow, that's great. Gordon Parks, what a wonderful story. So you met different artists like that, and they've all influenced you in a way,
Well,
or inspired you. Inspired you. Let's put it that way.
I think that's true. I think you're always inspired by other talents that you appreciate, and it just gives you a warmth, like you're a poet, and that the things that Nathaniel Mackey's done with Hambone and stuff like that, or his
Right.
own stuff. Well, sometimes when I read some of Nathaniel's or some of Ed's or even Dylan Thomas, those lines pop into your head like light breaks where no sun shines, and I was king of all apple towns and all that stuff. Those are phrases that never leave you because of the music and whatnot that are there. It's in the poem, and I think about those things, and I think about how inspirational or how satisfying to have the experience with those people and their work.
Right. I understand that. Believe me. And are you still in touch with Ed? Does he kind of visit you?
Oh yeah. Well, it is still, no matter where he goes, I still think he's a Pittsburgher. And
Right.
so when he comes to town, we get together, go to dinner. Sometimes I call, but Ed, as you probably know better than I, is a strange sleeping habits, living habits. He
That's
might be
true.
up at he might be up at 3 o'clock in the morning and sleep at noon.
Right.
So, but when he comes here, we have a great time. Yeah.
Good. Good. Should we open it up to questions? Thaddeus, you ready to field some questions from
Oh
some
yes.
people?
If I
Very
haven't revealed my whole personal life already.
We got quite a lot of, well, thank you both so much. I mean, this is just we're so lucky to hear you speak to your work, Thaddeus, today. And thank you, John, for all your questions. So I'm just going to ask on behalf of folks to kind of keep things simple here. So the first question we have is from Andrew Woolbright, who's a writer for The Rail. So he's on the road, but he wanted to ask about your dreams. He says, Thaddeus, what are your dreams like? And also, is there a sculpture of yours that you find to have really nailed it? One that you think of still in the studio? Or also, are there any exhibits that were really formative to your practice? That's 3 questions in one. So you can take just one if you want, up to you.
Well, I don't think that, of course, there are some people that say, you also see this thing I just did is so great, and knock your socks off. Well, I've never knocked anyone's socks off. So I don't feel that I've done some things that I'm proud of. I'm happy about they turned out. And so that's about, you keep trying because you're hoping the next one's going to be better or at least as good.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you. All right, so we just got a question that came in from Bill Page that says, do you consider any of your works as figurative?
Oh, yes, I've done some figurative things that are literally figurative. They haven't been shown that much. Well, early on, I started out doing heads and figures, small figures, and I think that they'll be resurrected in the new book that we're going to do.
Resurrected, okay.
Cool.
There's a lot to be resurrected with your work.
It's gonna be a big book. We have another here from HK who asks, how do you feel about large works being on pedestals?
Well, of course, everything depends on the work. I mean, if you have, say, a large, I'm very much for pedestals in public. It keeps people from running right into the sculpture, and in many cases, it keeps kids from climbing. I remember I got a call from the Carnegie way back, and someone had climbed on one of my pieces, even though it was on a pedestal, and the thing was cracked, and so I think pedestals, depending on what they are and how they're made and what they're designed for, are very useful. They can also separate the work from the ground or the space, the floor. And I think the idea that the work didn't grow out of the floor is pretty important.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you. All right, just a couple more. We won't keep you here all day, but Eleanor, my colleague, wanted to know what your favorite jazz spots in New York City are.
They're disappearing fast. I used to love the Jazz Standard years when I used to come here. Of course, the Vanguard is still there. The Village Gate is gone. Of course, Smoke is going. So now when I come, I go to the Vanguard and I go to Smoke just about. But you know, like every and once in a while, Blue Note and but some places are more tourist attraction than a jazz club, but that's okay as long as musicians can make a living. I'm happy. Beautiful.
Wow, the questions keep coming in. Just maybe a couple more good ones here. From SL Waddell, who says, is there an art experience that you haven't had yet that you would like to have?
When I think of art experience, I think of making something, but I think probably alluding to something that has happened to me. Well, you know, last year, Karma took me to Paris, and that was an experience that I've never had, and I enjoyed that immensely. So I would like to have maybe 2 or 3 other similar shows or experiences in other cities, other countries. I don't know if I'm not a great traveler, but that was very exhilarating for me. But that's about, but main thing I'm hoping for is able to do more decent work.
Hear that. Thank you. And SL Waddell said also that Mr. Mosley, you are a giant to me. Your work and work ethos are such an incredible inspiration. Thank you. So getting a lot of love in the chat here. We'll have to send you all the text after. And our just last question today here is from Fong Bui, the Rails publisher and artistic director. And Fong says, congrats, Thaddeus, on the amazing show. And he says, I wonder if you ever came into contact with Raoul Haig's direct carved sculptures in the 60s which have massive flowing forms as though they're three-dimensional counterpart of the broad, sweeping brushstrokes characteristic of abstract expressionist paintings. Or Gabrielle Cohn's cone sculptures, which evokes even greater simplicity and economy of abstraction.
Well, I have pictures of hogs, and I remember Gabriel Kahn was from the West Coast, and I was telling someone about him, but they couldn't find any examples of his work. But I love both of those people, and particularly in the realm of now mostly assemblage and installation. I think we're sort of distinct, if not a vanishing breed. So I really enjoyed those people. Thank you.
We'll tell Fong. And thank you for taking all those questions. I know I said we'd get 2 in, but I think that we snuck in some more. And so here at the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading. And I'm so thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Mark He, here to the stage. Mark is a scientist, poet, and artist living in Queens, New York. He's a first-generation immigrant. His work has appeared in Works and Days, The Reservoir, forthcoming, and World War III Illustrated. Thank you, Mark, so much for joining. I'll turn things over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Carolyn. And thank you so much, John and Thaddeus, for that conversation. And it's truly an honor to be among you guys. Yeah, thank you to the Rail and Chloe and Eleanor as well for bringing me here. So I'm gonna read 2 things, one of which was appeared in Works and Days, and I guess the other, unfortunately, is a little similar, but maybe similar. I just tried to find the things that had were about sculpture. City is the Sphinx. The burial of clay idols, earthen limbs was registered in the historical record as first terracide, second soon to follow, or already a work in progress, starting from the stripping of the streetcar tracks, or even more primordial forms of slash and burn architecture. Perhaps out of monotheistic guilt, idols were rebuilt as buildings' heads, Gnostic cupolas to approximate daily Sphinx, pose you questions, transmit thoughts through dreams, and you take a picture to better remember its image upon waking. When you find the picture between the seams of your eyelids, it asks you, how did it get like this? From the realm of reminder to conscious association. The question is asked by another question. The question is a Sphinx. Before it is asked, must it be begged? Every question finds its answer in a self-fulfilling prophecy drawn from discrete sequences of quid pro quos. But whose selves are they fulfilling? Self is recursion. Self-similar Sphinx has many questions for and from itself. The Sphinx is an inquisitor. The Sphinx is a sentinel. The city is patrolled by its sphinxes. The city is a Sphinx. The city has forgotten you, declared the poets from another era, but the city has no longer forgotten you, or perhaps it forgot to forget. Instead, it scrutinizes your indelible past and futures with its penetrating gaze, gnawing at your liver, yellowing at your cornea, for fear of everywhere edifice, for fear of everyday Oedipus. Leave work under weather forecasted in a Markovian mood. Cold hands configure a mini-max mudra. Rate of return and future warmth exploit the rising interest rates in labor theory of heat, heat theory of time, time theory of labor, labor theory of heat, heat theory of cold. An idea is a theory without rigor. An ideal is an idea without theory. That was my title. That theory. An ideal is an ideal with a landscape. An idol is an idyll slaked with the accumulation of sediment in its infinite idleness. No theory, only dust. No ideal, no idea. Blindfolded idols, roadside mounds. Once they had been stupas to Earth Mother, replaced by blinkering altars for transport theories with fixed income prayers. They rectify your natural inclination to be led astray on your evening commute, and later at night you dreamt of heavy rain in a grid system or a lattice. As a reminder for you to wake up and not forget to tend to your rock garden and water the Medusa head. So that was the first one, and then another one is also about sculpture, it's called Nature's Necropolis. Ancient radicals of modern language hide in plain sight. Business as usual as thought extinction, but taboo in its ulterior dialect. Who invented those whirring motors that cause words to have double meanings? Effluvia of the pelvic ear. Sublingual nectar from migraine memory shudders the ghostly, sleepless dawnlight, losing blueness but gaining veracity, malingering shadow, transition into day, dust off the antimatter, reveals a hidden Oxford camera, brightly painted garden with centerpiece rebus, life-sized and lifelike, carved from wood, dressed in clay, sculpture graveyard for wayward projects. Dreamt again of speaking to the dead. Inverted spring, tanning beds for sun-dried fruits, greener pastures in nature's necropolis. The best fertilizers money can buy. That's all. Thank you.
Wow, Mark, thank you. That was
Thank you.
beautiful. Yeah, such a great, couldn't think of a better way really to end this incredible conversation today. Immense gratitude to you, Thaddeus and John, and everyone from Karma I know is standing around there. Thank you for all your support in preparing for today's event. We also would like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program, making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive. Today's conversation was recorded. You can view it on our YouTube channel and our website shortly. For the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our free monthly publication and free public events like our daily NSE. Please check the chat for a link to donate. Join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a poetry reading curated by Louis Friedman, featuring Naima Lowe, Joey Yuris Algozin, Brian Cherry, Naima Lowe, and Pupe Misagi. And you can now all turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Super, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thaddeus.
Thank you,
Thank
Thaddeus.
you.
Thank you,
Thank
John.
you.
That
Thank you, John.
was amazing.
Thank
All
you.
right, Thaddeus. We'll see you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Really great.
Great to see you.
Thank you so much.
Mark, it was so
Thank you,
beautiful.
everyone.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations on the
you.
show, Thaddeus. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this. And if you're in LA, go see the show.
Yes, go see the show.